Hi, and welcome to 60 for 30, an ultra-budget Magic the Gathering project that looks to get you a playable 60-card deck for right around or under $30. Today, we're going to be looking at a standard deck that was inspired by me testing the other standard decks that I've been working on. What I mean by that is that I came across a card, Enigma Drake, that I saw played a lot, and none of the decks I played against seemed remotely good. They were always very dealable with. The only thing that they did well was land a giant Enigma Drake at some point, but you needed one removal spell to kill it. The deck really lacked threat density. That was the main problem that it had, so I wanted to see what I could do with it and keep it on a budget. What I came up with is based around more threats. Okay, so we have our Enigma Drake, which is a sweet card. For just 3 mana, you're going to get a flying creature with 4 toughness, or is equal to the number of instants and sorcery cards in your graveyard. We're going to have Curious Homunculus, which you're almost never going to see in this untransformed version, because at the beginning of your turn, if there are 3 or more instant or sorcery cards in your graveyard, which we're definitely going to make happen with this deck, it transforms into a Voracious Reader, which is a 3/4 creature with prowess, and it makes our instant and sorcery spells cost 1 less to cast. Cryptic Serpent is really kind of the all-star of this deck. It's a 6/5 creature that, if we're doing this right, costs us 2 mana. It's extremely efficient, and even if we can't get 5 instants and sorceries into the graveyard, we're at least going to have 3 or 4, making it a very reasonably costed creature. And then Bedlam Reveler is the same deal. It's a little harder to make it cost 2 mana, but definitely possible. It also has prowess, and its last effect, when it enters the battlefield, you discard your hand, then draw 3 cards, helps us in the late game with card advantage. So in addition to those threats, we obviously need to fill our graveyard with instants and sorceries. The fastest way to do this is with Contingency Plan. For just 2 mana, you're essentially going to dump 5 cards into your graveyard, plus the Contingency Plan. So ideally, one Contingency Plan will put itself in the graveyard, and then 2, 3, or 4 instants and sorceries from the 5 cards that you reveal. You can also use Contingency Plan to make sure that your next draw is decent and what you want if you need land or a creature. The reason it's not, strictly speaking, a good card is that it loses you card advantage because you don't draw any cards, you just rearrange the order. So unless you need it to help your deck be explosive and lead to some turn 3 Cryptic Serpents and whatnot, then Contingency Plan can be kind of bad. So you might want to consider Compelling Argument instead, because it also can help fill your graveyard. And if you draw it late game, you can just cycle it and draw a different card, so it's not completely useless. But I actually do prefer the other card because of the card selection. It's a little more reliable than Compelling Argument. We're also going to run Slip Through Space. This helps us get our giant creatures through any chump blocking. Cryptic Serpent's great, but if you're attacking into 1/1 servo tokens every turn, you're not going to win the game very quickly. So Slip Through Space helps with that. And more importantly, it puts itself in the graveyard for just 1 mana and draws us a card to replace it, which helps us put more cards in the graveyard. Take Inventory is one of my pet cards. I love this card because the first Take Inventory that you play isn't going to be great, but it's going to replace itself, put a card in the graveyard. And every Take Inventory you play after that is going to be phenomenal, drawing you a ton of cards for very little mana. And then in a perfect world, we put one of these in our graveyard with a Compelling Argument type effect, and then the first one we play is going to draw us 2 cards, which really helps get cards in our graveyard and in our hand. And then Hieroglyphic Illumination can help us draw cards, or it's usually just going to be cycled right away to put itself in the graveyard and replace itself, but late game can draw us 2 cards. In addition to our effective, efficient creatures and our cards that fill up the graveyard, we also need these interaction cards. Sweltering Suns is amazing, and I have 2 in this list. You could probably put more in if you want to spend the extra few dollars. I was trying to keep this as budget as possible, so I only went with 2, but the 2 Sweltering Suns costs probably 3 times as much as the rest of the deck put together online, so if you don't mind spending like $6 extra, you can play the playset online. But moral of the story, it's a great card because every threat you have in here has at least 4 toughness, meaning this is never going to kill your threats, but it can wipe your opponent's board. And if it's not the right card, you can cycle it. Censor is super good. A lot of this deck is about decision making. It's not particularly easy to play. For example, you have to know when to leave mana up to Censor and when to just cycle it and try and play another card on your turn from the card that you draw from the cycling. And it's this whole big thing. Censor's a difficult card to play correctly, but it does offer a lot of versatility, either getting you a new card and putting one in your graveyard or countering a spell. Fall of the Titans is an all-star card. We have a lot of cheap spells in this deck, and a lot of spells that can be cheap, even if they don't have a low converted mana cost, like our Cryptic Serpent. And Fall of the Titans is okay when you have to pay the double X in its casting cost, but when you can pay the surge cost, this can blow out so many decks, just removing a creature and dealing 5 damage to your opponent, removing 2 giant creatures. I had one game where I was playing red-blue control, and I killed 2 torrential Gearhawks with 1 Fall of the Titans. It was great. And then we're going to run Shock because it's a nice little versatile card, gets some extra damage through, helps remove a creature early, slows your opponent down, and gets itself in the graveyard for just 1 mana. Lands can't be more basic than this. Tap lands, basic island, basic mountain. So this is what the deck looks like. Turn 1, you cycle Censor. You draw a card. Turn 2, you play a Contingency Plan and get a bunch of stuff in your graveyard. Turn 3, say you land a Curious Homunculus. And then turn 4, it transforms into Voracious Reader. You play a Cryptic Serpent, and you still have 2 mana left up for a Censor, for a Take Inventory, for a Shock, for whatever you want. You have it available at this stage. So this deck can definitely be explosive. Sideboard options, basic blue counter stuff. If you're playing a deck that's big on artifacts, Ceremonious Rejection can win the game by itself. If you counter an Aetherworks Marvel or a Heart of Kirin, it can make a huge difference. And then Negate is here because the games that I lost, it felt like what always happened is that all of my threats were killed and then I didn't have anything. Because all of the threats that we throw out there are big and scary up to a certain point in the game. They're big and scary when they're coming out on turn 4, 5, 6, but not turn 12. So Negate keeps our earlier creatures alive from removal spells and can be used for other things when you're playing a deck that has an awful lot of removal. Because I said the problem with the Enigma Drake list that I'd seen before was that the Enigma Drakes died, and that happens less in this deck since we're running a lot more threats, but it can still happen. So Negate's a card that you should run in the sideboard if you're going to do that. For upgrades, obviously the fast lands instead of Highland Lakes. We talked about adding more Sweltering Suns to this, and Thing in the Ice could be really good as well, depending on the direction that you want to take the build. The Bedlam Reveler is a horror, so that when it transforms into Awoken Horror, it doesn't bounce that back to your hand. You can keep a lot of power on the board. So some deck notes. This is in control deck colors and has a lot of control deck cards in it, but is not a control deck. You want to spend your early turns getting as many instants and sorceries in your graveyard as possible, and then start landing threats as much as possible. You have a lot of interaction, but that does not mean that you're a control deck. This deck is not easy to play, but it feels like it always has a play. And a lot of times I would be kicking myself at the end thinking, oh, if I had taken a different line of play or played smarter or more cautiously or more aggressive, I could have won that game. And that was the prevailing feeling, is even though I did win a lot of games, even the games I lost, I felt like I had a chance. I was in it. It always has something, right? If you're being swamped by tokens, you could draw Sweltering Suns. If they have a giant creature, you could get a Fall of the Titans. You could have held your counter spell with your Censor to counter their Aetherworks Marvel and set them way back. I already mentioned that the deck does struggle with decks that can consistently remove 3 or more big creatures a game, because that's about how many you can expect to see. So you can sideboard against that, but every deck has a weakness. I still like this deck, even though that could get it into trouble sometimes. It's standard until the fall of 2017, when Shadows over Innistrad block rotates out. And the price is about $21 on the paper world. So if you're looking for our typical $30 budget, you can definitely add those extra Sweltering Suns and be fine. Online, the deck costs like $2-3 tops online, with the exception of the Sweltering Suns. So if you're looking for a super budget list, play it without the Sweltering Suns in those 2 slots. And if you're looking to spend a little more than the $7 here, go ahead and add more Sweltering Suns. Just whatever floats your boat. And that's it, guys. That's my Enigma Drake deck. That's my Cryptic Serpent deck. That's my fun, interactive, blue-red, land big, scary creatures, get rid of your opponent's stuff, draw cards, cycle, have fun deck. I think it's decent. I love it if you test it out and let me know what you thought. I had a lot of fun with this one. It actually wasn't the next deck I was going to make a video on, but it leapfrogged one because I like this one a lot. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, comment, find me on Reddit, leave a comment there, tell your friends so that they can watch it, I guess. I don't know. Unless you didn't like it, then don't recommend it to your friends because they'll think you have bad taste, but whatever. I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. Just have fun out there, guys and gals. That's what it's all about.